The red alert blazed through the corridors of Orbital Command as Captain James Reed moved with determined strides toward the hangar bay. His face revealed nothing, but his mind raced with calculations and contingencies. 5 officers followed him, each wearing the same grim expression. They had made their choice. There was no turning back. Captain, final systems check complete. The Thunderbolt is ready for departure, Lieutenant Anna Wilson reported, falling into step beside him. Her voice remained steady, though Reed noticed how her fingers trembled slightly as she passed him the datapad. "And the package?" Reed asked quietly. "Secured in the ship's vault. All tactical data, defense codes, and fleet deployments as requested." Reed nodded. 6 months of careful planning had led to this moment. Earth's most advanced warship and its most sensitive military secrets were about to disappear into the stars. The weight of what they were about to do pressed down on him like a physical force. The hangar doors slid open, revealing the sleek form of the EFS Thunderbolt. Its experimental quantum drive made it the fastest vessel humans had ever built, and its weapons systems were generations ahead of anything else in Earth's fleet. It was humanity's ace against the Vex Empire, the alien force that had been pushing at the borders of human space for decades. And Reed was about to hand it to them. "We have a problem," Officer Mark Davis whispered, checking his communicator. "Admiral Grant just arrived on station. He's asking for you specifically." Reed froze. Thomas Grant had been his mentor, the closest thing to a father he'd ever known. Grant wasn't supposed to be here for another 3 days. "How long until he realizes what we're doing?" Reed asked. "Minutes at most. Security is already questioning our hangar clearance." Reed made his decision. "Move now. Everyone aboard." The small group of officers rushed toward the Thunderbolt's boarding ramp. Alarm klaxons began to sound throughout the hangar. "Captain Reed." The voice boomed across the hangar, stopping Reed at the foot of the ramp. He turned to see Admiral Grant standing at the entrance, flanked by security personnel. "What is the meaning of this?" For a moment, something flickered in Reed's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or regret. Then his face hardened. "I'm sorry, Admiral. Truly." Reed raised his weapon and fired at the control panel beside the hangar doors. Sparks flew as the panel exploded, causing emergency blast doors to slam shut, temporarily cutting off security forces from the hangar. "James, don't do this." Grant's voice had lost its command tone, replaced by something that sounded like heartbreak. "Whatever they've offered you, it's not worth it." Reed backed up the ramp, weapon still raised. "You don't understand. You can't." Inside the ship, engines were already powering up. Wilson appeared at Reed's side. "Captain, we need to go now." Reed gave one last look at his mentor, then turned and disappeared inside the ship. The Thunderbolt's ramp closed with a hiss of hydraulics. In the control room, Admiral Grant watched in disbelief as the ship's engines flared to life. "Override the hangar doors," he ordered. "They cannot leave with that ship." But it was too late. The Thunderbolt's weapons opened fire, blasting through the sealed hangar doors. The vacuum of space pulled at everything, not bolted down as the ship shot through the opening. On the bridge of the Thunderbolt, Reed took his command chair. His officers worked their stations in tense silence. On the main view screen, Earth grew smaller as they accelerated away. "Set course for the coordinates," Reed ordered, his voice hollow. "Course laid in," Wilson confirmed. "Taking us beyond the detection grid. We'll reach Vex territory in 48 hours. Reed stared at the shrinking blue planet on the screen. His home. The world he had sworn to protect. "Captain," Wilson said quietly, standing beside his chair, "are we doing the right thing?" Reed didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his words were barely audible. "History will call us traitors, but sometimes betrayal is the only path forward." The Thunderbolt vanished into the darkness, carrying with it humanity's greatest defenders turned deserters, and the secrets that might spell Earth's doom. 5 years passed since Captain James Reed and his crew had fled to the Vex Empire. The gleaming towers of the alien capital rose around him as he stood on the balcony of his luxury apartment. The 3 moons of the Vex homeworld hung in the purple sky, a constant reminder that he was an outsider here, no matter what comforts they provided. Reed touched the scar on his face, a parting gift from an Earth Special Forces team that had tried to assassinate him 2 years ago. The attempt had failed, but it had succeeded in one thing, showing Reed exactly how Earth viewed him now. Traitor, deserter, monster. A chime announced a visitor. Lieutenant Anna Wilson entered, her once crisp military bearing now softened by civilian clothes, though her eyes remained as sharp as ever. "The Vex have launched another attack," she said without greeting. "They hit the new Mars colony this time." Reed's jaw tightened. Casualties. Thousands. They used the fleet dispersal strategy you developed for Admiral Grant 3 years before we left. Wilson's voice held an accusation. "They promised they would only use our information to force a peace treaty," Reed said, though the words sounded hollow even to himself. "That's the 5th promise they've broken this year," Wilson replied. "And they're keeping us more isolated than ever. Did you notice our security detail doubled last week?" Reed had noticed. What had begun as a luxurious sanctuary was slowly revealing itself as a gilded cage. The Vex leaders still welcomed him at their grand functions, still praised him publicly as the human who saw truth. But fewer areas of the capital were accessible to him and his crew now. Information was increasingly restricted. "I need to speak with High Commander Zarek," Reed decided. The agreement was clear, our information in exchange for a path to peaceful coexistence. Wilson's laugh was bitter. "You still believe that was ever their plan?" Before Reed could answer, his private terminal flashed with an incoming message, a summons to the High Command Center. Unusual, as Reed and his crew had been kept away from military installations for months now. 3 hours later, Reed stood before the Vex Leadership Council, their elongated forms towering over him. High Commander Zarek's 4 eyes studied Reed with what he had learned to recognize as contempt. "Captain Reed." Zarek's translator device conveyed his clicking speech into English. "We have decided to share our final victory plans with you, a courtesy for your contributions." A holographic display activated, showing Earth and its defense network. Then, methodically, it demonstrated the planned Vex assault, not a conventional military operation, but a systematic harvesting of Earth's population. "What is this?" Reed demanded, horror rising in his throat. "This isn't war. This is extermination." Zarek made the rippling motion that passed for amusement among the Vex. "Did you truly believe we wanted peace? Your species occupies worlds rich in resources we require. Your bodies contain biological compounds essential to our reproductive cycle." The truth crashed down on Reed like a physical blow. He had never been a valued ally, just a useful tool to be discarded once its purpose was served. "This violates everything we agreed to," Reed said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I won't let you do this." "You misunderstand, human," Zarek replied. "You are not being consulted. You are being informed, as a final courtesy." As Reed turned to leave, Zarek added, "Your quarters are being relocated tomorrow. For your safety, of course." Reed knew what that meant. Prison, or worse. Back in his apartment, he found Wilson waiting with Officer Davis and the others. "They're going to harvest Earth," Reed said, his voice hollow. "Humans are just resources to them. Always were." Wilson's face showed no surprise. "I accessed their biological research database last month. I've been waiting for you to see the truth." "We need to warn Earth," Davis said. Reed stared out at the alien city that had been his home and his prison. "They'll never believe us. Not after what we did." Wilson stepped closer. "There's something else. A new signal we've been tracking. Another alien species has appeared at the edge of Vex space. The Vex are afraid of them." Reed turned from the window, a dangerous light kindling in his eyes. "Then maybe it's time we made some new friends." The first attack came without warning. Reed watched from his new quarters. a sparse three-room living space deep within a secure Vex facility, as emergency alarms blared across the capital city. Through the narrow window, he saw strange ships with organic-looking hulls descending from the clouds. They moved with unsettling grace, like predators confident in their superiority. "What are they?" Davis asked, joining Reed at the window. "The collectors," Wilson answered from behind them, her voice tense. She held a stolen Vex data tablet. "That's what the Vex call them. I've been monitoring their secure channels. The Vex have encountered them before on distant worlds." The collector ships fired strange pulsing weapons that didn't destroy buildings but instead seemed to extract something from them, leaving hollow shells behind. Even from this distance, Reed could see Vex citizens being pulled into the air by invisible forces, drawn up into the waiting ships. "They're harvesting them," Reed said, the irony not lost on him. "Just like the Vex planned to harvest humans." A tremendous explosion rocked the building as a Vex defense tower crumbled under collector fire. Their door slid open, and 2 Vex guards entered, weapons ready. "You will come with us," one ordered through its translator. "High Commander Sarek demands your presence." In the underground command center, chaos reigned. Vex officials rushed between stations as displays showed their defenses failing across multiple fronts. Sarek stood in the center, his normally imposing frame somehow diminished. "Your timing is fortunate, Reed," Sarek said when he spotted the humans. "These invaders use technology unlike anything we've encountered. Your species' approach to warfare is unpredictable. We require your tactical assessment." Reed studied the battle displays, immediately grasping what he was seeing. "The collectors are toying with you. Their technology is far beyond yours. Beyond ours, too. They're not even deploying their main fleet yet." "Impossible," Sarek clicked angrily. "The Vex Empire spans hundreds of systems." Reed pointed to a pattern in the attack formations. "Look here and here. They're not trying to defeat you. They're cataloging your responses, learning your capabilities. This is reconnaissance." A junior Vex officer approached, clearly agitated. "High Commander, we've intercepted communications. The collectors are discussing Earth." The command center fell silent. Sarek's 4 eyes turned to Reed. "It appears your homeworld is already known to them," Sarek said. "They refer to humans as prime specimens. Their next target, after they finish with us." Reed exchanged glances with Wilson and Davis. They had to warn Earth, but how? "Let us help you fight them," Reed offered. "If the collectors defeat you, Earth is next. We have a common enemy now." "Your assistance is noted," Sarek responded coldly. "But not required. Return them to their quarters," he ordered the guards. Back in their rooms, Reed gathered his crew. "The Vex are going to lose this war, and quickly. We need to get out of here and warn Earth." "With what ship?" Davis asked. "And even if we escape, Earth will shoot us down before we can deliver any message." Wilson pulled out the stolen data tablet. "I've been working on something. The Thunderbolt. Our ship. It's still here. They've been studying it, but haven't cracked all its systems. I've located it in a research facility 3 levels down." "Can we reach it?" Reed asked. "Not without help," Wilson admitted. "But I've been in contact with someone who might assist us." Reed stared at her in shock. "You've what?" "I never fully defected, Captain," Wilson said quietly. "I've been feeding information to Earth intelligence for 3 years. There's an agent embedded among the human workers here. They can help us reach the ship." Before Reed could respond, the building shook violently as another attack hit nearby. The lights flickered and died, replaced by dim emergency lighting. "We need to move now," Wilson urged. During the confusion, Reed looked at his crew, the officers who had followed him into betrayal and exile. "If we do this, and somehow make it back to Earth, they'll execute us for treason. Better to die trying to save our world than live knowing we helped destroy it," Davis said simply. Reed nodded, decision made. "Lead the way, Lieutenant. Let's go home." In the darkness outside, collector ships continued their methodical harvest of the once mighty Vex Empire, their next target already decided. The Thunderbolt emerged from hyperjump with a violent shudder, its systems straining after years of neglect and hasty repairs. On the bridge, Captain Reed gripped his command chair as warning lights flashed across every console. "Status report," he ordered, voice calm despite the chaos. "Jump drive critically damaged," Davis reported from the engineering station. "Weapons at 40%. Life support stable but shields are failing." Reed studied the view screen where Earth hung like a blue jewel against the darkness of space. Home. After 5 years, the sight of it stirred something deep within him. Regret, longing, determination. "They've detected us," Wilson announced tensely. "Earth Defense Fleet is deploying. 6 cruisers on intercept course." Reed had expected this. "Open a channel." "Channel open." "But they're not responding," Wilson said. "Wait, incoming transmission." The view screen flickered, and Reed found himself looking at the weathered face of Admiral Thomas Grant. 5 years had etched new lines around his eyes and mouth, but his gaze was as piercing as ever. "James Reed," Grant's voice was cold steel. "You have entered Earth-controlled space in a stolen military vessel. You will power down all systems and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in your immediate destruction." "Admiral, we need to speak with you," Reed replied. "Earth is in imminent danger." Grant's laugh was bitter. "From you. We're well aware." "Not from us. From a species called the Collectors. They've already conquered the Vex, and Earth is next." "More lies," Grant dismissed. "Power down your systems. This is your final warning." The transmission cut. Wilson turned to Reed, her face pale. "Weapons are locking onto us from all ships." Reed made his decision. "Send them everything we have on the Collectors. The attack footage, the Vex data, everything." "Captain, that information is our only bargaining chip," Davis warned. "This isn't about bargaining anymore," Reed replied. "It's about survival." Wilson worked quickly, compiling the data package. "Transmitting now, but they'll still likely fire on us." "Then we need to show good faith," Reed said. He stood, addressing the entire bridge crew. "Power down weapons and shields. Drop to minimal life support." Davis stared at him. "That leaves us completely vulnerable." "Exactly," Reed said quietly. "If we're going to die today, let it not be as enemies of Earth." The Thunderbolt went dark, drifting silently as the Earth warships surrounded it. Minutes passed in tense silence. Then the communication system crackled to life again. "Reed," Admiral Grant's voice had changed, tension replacing the coldness. "The data you sent. Our analysts confirm it appears authentic. Is this truly what we're facing?" "It is," Reed confirmed. "And what you're seeing is just the beginning. The Collectors harvest entire civilizations. They took down the Vex Empire in weeks. A species that's been fighting us for decades fell in less time than it takes Earth to hold an election." A long pause followed. "Why should I believe anything from the man who betrayed Earth's greatest secrets to our enemy?" Reed closed his eyes briefly. Here it was, the moment of truth. "Because despite what you believe, I never stopped being loyal to Earth," Reed said. "My defection was complicated, but right now, that doesn't matter. What matters is that the Collectors are coming, and neither humanity nor what's left of the Vex can stop them alone." Another pause, longer this time. "You will be escorted to Defense Station Alpha," Grant finally said. "You and your crew will remain in custody while we verify your information. If you make any unauthorized moves, you will be destroyed without hesitation." "Understood," Reed replied. "Thank you, Admiral." The transmission ended. Wilson looked at Reed, hope and fear warring in her expression. "Do you think they'll listen?" "They have to," Reed said, watching as Earth grew larger in the view screen. "Because if they don't, there won't be anyone left to judge whether we were traitors or not." The Thunderbolt moved slowly toward Earth, surrounded by warships that had once been its allies, then its hunters, and now its uncertain escorts. On board, Reed and his crew prepared to face the judgment of the world they had abandoned, and now sought desperately to save. As they approached the orbital station, Reed spotted a new structure in Earth orbit, a massive defense platform that hadn't existed when they left. "They've been preparing for war," he observed, "but for the wrong enemy." The holding cell on Defense Station Alpha was sparse but not uncomfortable. Reed sat on the edge of his bunk, watching the Earth rotate slowly through the small reinforced window. 2 weeks had passed since their return. 2 weeks of endless debriefings, interrogations, and suspicious glares. The door slid open, and Lieutenant Wilson entered, flanked by armed guards. Despite her prisoner status, she carried herself with dignity. "Captain," she nodded. "Admiral Grant has requested our presence in the command center." Reed raised an eyebrow. "Both of us? That's new." The walk through the station revealed how much had changed in 5 years. Military personnel moved with urgent purpose, and civilians were nowhere to be seen. The station had transformed from a scientific outpost to a fortress. Admiral Grant stood before a massive tactical display when they entered the command center. He didn't look up immediately, studying reports with intense concentration. "Your intel on Vex shield modulation frequencies checked out," Grant said finally, still not looking at them. "We've been able to adapt our weapon systems accordingly." Reed nodded. "Their technology has specific vulnerabilities. If you combine. If I wanted your tactical advice, I'd ask for it." Grant cut him off sharply, finally turning to face them. His expression softened slightly when he looked at Wilson. "Lieutenant, your information has proven valuable. Earth intelligence confirms they received your transmissions over the past 3 years." Wilson stood straighter. "I never stopped serving Earth, sir." "So it seems," Grant acknowledged. "Though your decision to follow Reed remains questionable." "Someone needed to keep an eye on him," she replied with the ghost of a smile. A junior officer approached, handing Grant a data tablet. He reviewed it quickly, his expression darkening. "The long-range sensors have detected something," Grant announced. "A small vessel approaching from the direction of former Vex space. Its configuration matches the collector scouts you described." Reed stepped forward instinctively, then stopped when the guards tensed. "Admiral, this is our chance. If we can capture that scout ship intact, we can study their technology." Grant studied Reed for a long moment. "Officer Davis tells me you developed specialized tactics against the Vex during your time away." "Yes," Reed confirmed. "We observed their weaknesses firsthand." Grant gestured to the tactical display. "Show me how you would intercept this scout without destroying it." For the next hour, Reed worked with Earth's tactical officers, outlining an approach to disable rather than destroy the collector vessel. Wilson provided additional insights on the collector's observed behaviors during the Vex attacks. "They're overconfident," she explained. "They don't expect resistance because they've rarely encountered it." As the plan took shape, Reed noticed the atmosphere in the command center shifting. The open hostility toward him and his crew faded, replaced by guarded professional respect, as Earth's officers recognized their expertise. 3 days later, Reed stood in the examination bay, watching as technicians carefully studied the captured collector scout. The mission had succeeded with minimal casualties, though 2 Earth fighters had been damaged in the process. "Their technology is like nothing we've seen," the chief scientist reported to Admiral Grant. "Partially biological, partially mechanical. And their navigation system suggests a massive fleet gathering just beyond our detection range." Grant's face remained impassive, but Reed could see the concern in his eyes. "Timeline? 2 weeks. Maybe 3, the scientist replied. Grant turned to Reed and Wilson. "It seems we have very little time to prepare." Reed nodded. "The main collector fleet is exponentially more powerful than what we just faced." "Then we need every advantage," Grant said. He took a deep breath, clearly making a difficult decision. "Captain Reed, Lieutenant Wilson, Your security restrictions are lifted. You'll work directly with our tactical team to prepare Earth's defenses." Reed couldn't hide his surprise. "Admiral, are you certain? Your officers might not." "My officers will follow orders," Grant interrupted. "And my order is to use every resource available to defend Earth." His expression hardened. "But make no mistake, you haven't been forgiven. You've simply become necessary." As they left the examination bay, Wilson walked beside Reed. "It's a start," she said quietly. Reed watched as station personnel hurried past, preparing for a war they barely understood. "A start," he agreed. "Let's hope it's not also the end." The collector armada emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of massive insects, their organic-looking ships forming patterns that seemed almost beautiful, until they opened fire. Earth's outer defense platforms shattered under the assault, their destruction visible as brief flashes of light from Defense Station Alpha's command center. "Platforms 7 through 22 are gone," an officer reported, voice steadied despite the catastrophic news. "The Jupiter outpost has gone silent." Admiral Grant studied the tactical display, his face grim. "Status of the primary defense grid. Holding for now, sir, but shield strength is down to 60% and falling." Reed stood at the auxiliary tactical station, analyzing the collector attack patterns. The past week had been a blur of preparation, retrofitting Earth's ships with modified weapons based on Vex technology, training crews on new tactics, and preparing the civilian population for possible evacuation. Now it all seemed woefully inadequate. "They're testing us," Reed observed. "This isn't their full force yet." Grant joined him at the display. "How can you be sure?" "The Vex had 3 times our firepower, and the collectors overwhelmed them in hours. They're holding back, studying our responses." A massive explosion rocked the station as a nearby defense satellite was hit. Alarms blared throughout the command center. "Shield breach in sectors 4 and 6, shouted the defense officer. "They've adapted to our frequency modulations already." Reed's mind raced, connecting patterns he'd observed during the Vex defeat. They're organic technology users. They evolve their tactics in real time. He turned to Wilson, who was coordinating with Earth's ground defenses. "Remember the Vex research facility? The one studying biological interfaces." Her eyes widened with understanding. "The quantum field disruptor. It interrupted their neural networks." Reed nodded, turning to Grant. "Admiral, the Vex were developing a weapon that targets the biological components of collector ships. We never saw it deployed because they completed it too late, but I studied the principles. With the Thunderbolt systems, and what we've learned from the scout ship, we might be able to recreate it." Grant didn't hesitate. "What do you need?" "Access to the Thunderbolt, a team of your best engineers, and about 6 hours we don't have," Reed replied honestly. Grant made his decision. "You've got 3 hours. I'll reassign the Mars fleet to create a diversion." As Reed and Wilson raced toward the hangar bay where the Thunderbolt was docked, another blast rocked the station. Emergency bulkheads slammed down ahead of them, blocking their path. "This way," Wilson said, pulling Reed down an alternative corridor. "Maintenance access." They reached the Thunderbolt to find Davis already there with a team of Earth engineers, already working on the ship's systems. "I figured you'd come up with something crazy," Davis explained with a grim smile. "So I got started." For the next 3 hours, they worked frantically, integrating Vex technology with Earth systems and the Thunderbolt's experimental quantum drive. The resulting weapon was crude but theoretically functional, a pulse that would disrupt the neural connection between the biological and mechanical components of collector ships. "It's ready," Reed announced finally, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But there's a problem. The range is limited, and the pulse has to be generated from the Thunderbolt's core. Someone has to fly directly into the center of their fleet to trigger it." Grant's voice came over the communication system. "The Mars fleet has engaged the collectors, but they're being decimated. Our main defense grid is at 20%. We're out of time." Reed looked at Wilson and Davis, then at the Earth engineers who had worked alongside them despite years of enmity. He made his decision. "Admiral, I'm taking the Thunderbolt out. Lieutenant Wilson and Officer Davis will coordinate from the station." "This is a suicide mission, Reed," Grant said quietly. "I know," Reed replied. "Consider it the beginning of my redemption." As Reed prepared the ship for launch, Wilson approached him. "The fleet will need coordination to take advantage of the disruption. Someone who understands collector vulnerabilities." Reed understood what she wasn't saying. "You're staying here, Lieutenant. That's an order." Wilson met his gaze steadily. "With respect, Captain, you're still officially a traitor. I don't have to follow your orders." Outside, the darkness of space was illuminated by the flashes of Earth's desperate battle against an overwhelming force. The clock was ticking. The Thunderbolt shot through the chaos of battle, its experimental engines pushing far beyond safety parameters. At the helm, Reed piloted manually, evading collector fire with maneuvers that defied conventional tactics. Beside him, Wilson monitored the weapon systems as warning lights flashed across every console. "Main fleet is engaging the eastern quadrant." Admiral Grant's voice crackled through the communication system. "We'll draw as many of them away as possible. You've got one shot at this, Reed." "Understood," Reed replied, his eyes fixed on the massive collector command ship looming ahead. Its organic hull pulsed with eerie bioluminescence, like a massive predator waiting in the darkness of space. "Weapon status?" Reed asked. "Disruptor charge to 83%, Wilson reported. "That's as high as it will go without overloading our systems." Reed nodded grimly. "It'll have to be enough." A squadron of smaller collector vessels broke formation, moving to intercept the Thunderbolt. Reed pushed the ship into a spiraling dive, narrowly avoiding the first volley of energy pulses. "They've identified us as a priority target," Wilson warned. "They must sense the weapon." The Thunderbolt shuddered as a glancing hit struck the port side. Alarms blared as systems failed across the ship. "Port shields down," Wilson reported calmly. "Hull breach on decks 3 and 4. Sealing now." Reed adjusted their course, using the debris from a destroyed Earth cruiser for momentary cover. "We need to get closer to the command ship. The disruptor's range won't reach from here." On Earth, millions watched the battle unfold through emergency broadcasts. Defense Station Alpha had become the coordination center for what remained of Earth's forces, with Officer Davis working alongside Admiral Grant's tactical team. "The Thunderbolt is taking heavy damage," Davis reported, watching the ship's telemetry. "But they're getting closer." Grant stood stoically, watching the tactical display. "All remaining ships, concentrate fire on Sector 7. Give them the opening they need." The Thunderbolt burst through a wall of fire as Earth's remaining warships launched a coordinated attack, creating a narrow corridor toward the collector command ship. Reed pushed the engines beyond their limits, knowing they wouldn't need to worry about the return journey. 500 kilometers to optimal range, Wilson announced. "Disruptor ready for deployment." Another hit rocked the ship, more violent than before. A support beam crashed down from the ceiling, striking Wilson's console. She fell back, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead. "Anna," Reed called out, unable to leave the helm. "Status." Wilson pulled herself back to her station, leaving a smear of blood on the console. "I'm fine. 300 kilometers to range." The view screen filled with a massive form of the collector command ship. It seemed to sense their intention, turning its primary weapons toward the approaching Thunderbolt. 200 kilometers, Wilson counted down. 150. The collector ship fired. The Thunderbolt's remaining shields flared and died under the assault. Hull plating tore away from the ship's frame. "Life support failing," the computer announced dispassionately. "Core containment at critical levels." 100 kilometers, Wilson said, fingers dancing across her damaged console. "We're in range." Reed locked eyes with her one last time. After everything, the betrayal, the exile, the return, it would end here together. "For Earth," he said simply. Wilson nodded. for redemption. She activated the disruptor. The Thunderbolt's remaining power surged into the weapon. A pulse of energy, invisible to the human eye, but devastating to the Collector's organic technology, exploded outward from the ship. The effect was immediate. The Collector command ship convulsed as though in pain. Throughout the fleet, ships began drifting aimlessly, their coordinated attack patterns dissolving into chaos. On Defense Station Alpha, Davis stared at the readings in disbelief. The neural connections are failing. Their ships are losing cohesion. Grant didn't hesitate. All ships, attack now. Target their disabled vessels with everything we have. Earth's remaining forces surged forward, striking at the suddenly vulnerable Collector fleet. Ships that had seemed invincible moments before now shattered under concentrated fire. At the center of the chaos, the Thunderbolt drifted, its engines dark, its hull breached in dozens of places. There was no signal from within. 3 days later, as Earth's forces continued to clean up the remains of the Collector fleet, a memorial service was held on Defense Station Alpha. Admiral Grant stood before the assembled military personnel, his weathered face solemn. "Today we honor those who gave their lives to save our world," he began. Among them, Captain James Reed and Lieutenant Anna Wilson. He paused, looking out at the faces watching him, many still bearing the distrust toward the names he had just spoken. History called them traitors, Grant continued. And perhaps they were, but in our darkest hour, they became something else entirely. They became our final hope.